Hey everybody, welcome to the Lesson Bank from the Sacramento Jazz Education Foundation. My name is Craig Faniani and this is Music Theory Lesson number 1. We're going to talk about the circle of fifths today. Sometimes you might have heard it called the circle of fourths or the cycle, but for today, and most people are familiar with, the circle of fifths. What you'll need is a knowledge of the whole step, half step system that makes a major scale. And hopefully you can sit in front of a piano keyboard as we do stuff like this. There are going to be lots of lessons, so stay tuned. All right, for the circle of fifths, or any circle for that matter, C is going to be at the top. And the reason C is at the top is because it has no sharps or flats. So it's a good place to start, especially on the piano. Okay, so what you'll do is put C at the top, and then you go up 5, because it's a fifth, circle of fifths, C, D, E, F, G. And always use your alphabet, by the way, and always use your ears to kind of tell you where you are. C, D, E, F, G. G would be the fifth, so that's the next spoke on the wheel, if you will, or the next click, clockwise. Then if we do that again, we're going to go to G up to D. You're going to eventually get C, G, D, A, E, B, and then it gets to a tricky transition. Up until now, you have been navigating on the sharp side of the circle. The scales associated with these notes have sharps in them, and we'll have more of that in a minute. So where are the flats? Well, the next fifth you land on is an interesting note because it can be called F sharp or G flat. That double name for the same note is called an enharmonic equivalent. So from here, we're going to continue with flat names, and we get D flat, A flat, E flat, B flat, F, and then we land on C. And it will look like this. Take a look at it, know it, love it, use it. Okay? Good. All right, just to set the record straight and not confuse anybody, up until now we've been talking about the letters that go around the circle as notes. I want you to know that right away here we're going to be talking about those notes actually representing a scale. And it could be any scale. It could be a major or a minor or a Phrygian or, all kinds of scales. The letters can also become chords. They're representative then of roots of chords, roots of scales, keys, key signatures, and the like. They're also going to be related to Roman numerals and numbers as we go. I want to make sure that you're not confused by that because as I thought about it from a teaching point of view, that might not be something that is clear to you. So that's the case. Okay, here we go. All right, now that our circle's complete, let's learn how to use it. Let's go back to C. We're going to follow the half step, whole step sequence to make a major scale. There are 88 black and white keys on the piano, and they're all half step apart. A chromatic scale, for instance, is all half steps. And then 2 half steps make a whole step. Okay, so E to F is a half step, but E to F sharp is a whole step. For the most part, anytime you go from a white note to a black note or a black note to a white note, it's a half step. You got to be careful though because there's no black note between E and F or between B and C on the piano. So those are half steps as well. E, F, and B, C, both half steps. So let's construct a major scale. It goes whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. If you do that, you will always get a major scale and you'll end up an octave above where you started. Notice that the half steps in the scale sequence in the key of C occur exactly where there's no black note on the piano. So you end up in this particular key with all white notes. So we say that the key of C has no sharps or flats. As we move to G and apply the same scale routine, we find that it goes G, A, B, C, D, E on white notes just fine. But the major scale requires a step up from E, and that makes us go to F sharp. And then the last half step lands us on G to complete the scale. So we say that the key of G has 1 sharp. That sharp is an F sharp. It's not a G flat. We can't start a scale on a G and have a G flat in it as well. So it's going to be F sharp for the sharp, and then the scale ends on G. Now we can say we're on the sharp side of the circle. Okay, let's do another one. Let's do the key of D. Now, we're going to do it a little differently. I'm going to show you how I do it. I'm going to start out, it's going to start with a D, it's going to end with a D. That makes sense. So alphabetically, I've got to have D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. That's all the letters. Let's look at those and let's figure out where the half steps and steps are and figure out what we have to do next. You'll first notice that the D to E is a step. That works out fine. But when you go from E to F, that's only a half step. But the sequence requires a whole step. So we have to go to F sharp. That makes sense because the last scale had an F sharp. So it makes sense we would continue with the F sharp. Then we go a half step to G, step to A, step to B. And then our final step is to C sharp, and our half step then lands us on D. So you might say the key of D has two sharps. Okay, so probably you're starting to see some sort of a sequence here. The key of C had no sharps or flats. The key of G had one sharp, F. The key of D has two sharps, F and C. What do you suppose the next key, the key of A, will have? You might be thinking, maybe it's got three sharps. All right, you're right. Okay, so if we continue with all the sharps, you're going to find that as we go around the circle, we're going to add sharps till we can't add sharps anymore. So you're probably going to want to know the sequence of how the sharps are added. And it's very simple. If you look at this is something else that the circle will tell you. It tells you the sequence of sharps. So take a look at the circle and find F and then follow it around to B. Well, that's the sequence in which the sharps are added. So your first scale, G, will have one sharp. That's an F sharp. The second sharp you add is a C sharp, and so on around the circle. Now, if you take that sequence backwards, any guesses? B all the way around to F, that's going to be the sequence in which the flats occur. So let's see how that works. Let's go to the other side of the circle, the flat side, if you will, and let's construct an F scale. Any guesses on how many flats are going to be in an F scale? Sure, there's one. We start with one, and we go around the same way, and we add them B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, right on down the line. Let's make sure. Here are the F letters, and you might notice there's something we have to fix. Right now, the half step is between the fourth and fifth notes. We want it between the third and fourth. So we have to make the B a B flat. That way we get A to B flat for our half step and B flat to C for our whole step. A couple of interesting tidbits. Whenever you add a new flat, it always shows up to be the fourth note of that scale. And conversely, every time you add a sharp, the new sharp ends up being the seventh note of the scale. So it's just one of those things that kind of helps you verify what you've thought. And as you're thinking about it, you can kind of check yourself and say, oh, I see where that went and I see why it did go there and it works. Okay. There's a little tricky part at the end. Remember that enharmonic equivalent thing? And we've got the F sharp that equals the G flat. There are also two other situations where that happens. A B can actually be a C flat. Hate C flats, but that's truly what can happen. And a D flat can actually be a C sharp. So around the bottom of the circle, it gets a little sketchy. Here's another depiction of the enharmonic equivalents if you're used to looking at a piano keyboard or notes on a page. But we don't really deal with those keys too much, so you might not have to worry about it. Just remember to keep your alphabet true and then to watch your sharps and flats and keep them separate. So stay tuned, and this is Craig Faniani for the Sacramento Jazz Education Foundation, signing off. Thank you very much for listening.